यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यमुनातीरावनचरे यमुनातीरावनचरे जय कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव जय राधा माधव जय कुंज बिहारी कपि जन्नवल्लभा जय गिरिवरधारी जय गिरिवरधारी कपि जन्नवल्लभा जय गिरिवरधारी जय गिरिवरधारी यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यशोदनन्दन व्रजजनरञ्जन यमुनातीरावनचरे यमुनातीरावनचरे जय राधा माधव जय कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव जय कुंज बिहारी जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्रजाकाचार्य Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila His Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudhirayed Nashtaprayeshu Vabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 18, Text 38. Tato betyashramam bhalo Tato betyashramam bhalo Gale sarpa kalevaram Gale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha Mukta kantorurodaha Tato betyashramam bhalo Gale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha Tato betyashramam balo Bale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha Tato beyashramam balo Bale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha Tato betyashramam balo Gale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha Tato betyashramam balo Gale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram vikshadhukarto Mukta kantorurodaha. Mataji's. Tato betyashramam balo Gale sarpa kalevaram Pitaram viksha dukkarto Mukta kantorurodaha. Word for word meaning. Tataha, thereafter. Abhyetya, after entering into. Ashramam, the hermitage. Balaha, boy. Gale sarpa, the snake on the shoulder. Kalevaram, body. Pitaram, onto the father. Vikshya, having seen. Dukkha artaha, in a sorry plight. Mukta kantaha, loudly. Ruroda, cried. Ha, in the past. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Thereafter, when the boy returned to the hermitage, he saw a snake on his father's shoulder, and out of his grief he cried very loudly. Purport. The boy was not happy because he committed a great mistake, and he wanted to be relieved of the burden on his heart by crying. So after entering the hermitage and seeing his father in that condition, he cried loudly so that he might be relieved. But it was too late. The father regretted the whole incident. Om Ajnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamhayyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradhayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvashe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So in this section of the Bhagavatam, we are moving very fast to Sukadeva Goswami's instructions to Parikshit Maharaj. In some sense, the Bhagavatam that Sukadeva Goswami himself spoke to Parikshit Maharaj. The Bhagavatam, the full 12 cantos, consists of a set of nested Bhagavatams. So the original Bhagavatam was spoken in 4 verses, the Lord to Brahma directly. And this is described in the 9th chapter of the 2nd canto. The same Bhagavatam was spoken across 3 chapters by Lord Brahma to Narada Muni. So that's the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of the 2nd canto. And the same Bhagavatam was spoken by Narada to Sri Vyasa Muni, and that is described in the 5th, 6th chapters of the 1st canto. Vyasadeva spoke a few verses of the Bhagavatam initially when Sukadeva Goswami was leaving, and then he instructed him in the Bhagavatam more completely. Sukadeva Goswami then spoke the Bhagavatam to Parikshit Maharaj, and that is described from the 2nd canto through to about the 5th chapter of the 12th canto. And then Sutta Goswami has presented the entire Bhagavatam that includes the 1st canto and the remainder of the 12th canto. But all of these Bhagavatams, nested Bhagavatams, are based on a few fundamental principles. The first one being that Krishna pervades everything in this world. And so any shelter that one may seek in individual things is actually to be found in Krishna. If I'm taking shelter of a bed, its softness, that softness actually comes from Krishna. When a devotee understands this point, instead of taking shelter or liking to individual things of this world, they can take shelter of Krishna directly, who's a reservoir of all these qualities. The second principle that is mentioned is that Krishna has got nothing to do with this material world. And that sets up the philosophical basis for pure devotional service. Services like hearing and chanting his pastimes that have got no connection with this material world. The third point that the Bhagavatam emphasizes is the practice of pure bhakti, which is the path to achieve him, the path to achieve the fourth point, love for him. These 4 points are emphasized in these different presentations of Srimad Bhagavatam. So when we say that in this stage of the Bhagavatam, we are moving very fast to the presentation of Bhagavatam by Sukadeva Goswami, what we are saying is that the first canto acts as a setup, as much as the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita acts as a prelude to the presentation of Krishna's instructions. So the context behind why Sukadeva Goswami is describing these individual narrations of Parikshit Maharaj is because through the narration of Parikshit Maharaj, the Bhagavatam was actually revealed to the world. In this sense, the Acharyas quote the famous verse, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata apyadhanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham. Krishna there says in Bhagavad Gita that whenever and wherever there's a disruption in religion, at that time, he says, I come to re-establish religious principles. So the Acharyas quote this verse in this context to say that Krishna has deliberately caused this, if you like, transgression of religious principles in Parikshit Maharaj's life. But in the case of such an exalted devotee, that apparent mistake is the cause of Krishna's appearance in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is for the benefit of the devotee and for everyone surrounding that devotee. So when Sutta Goswami had sat down in front of Shaunaka and other rishis, they had asked him 6 particular questions, and this comes in the 1st chapter. Following on from those 6 questions, which were answered in the 2nd and 3rd chapters of the 1st canto, Shaunaka Rishi inquired more further, and he wanted to know more about Krishna's pastimes. And Sutta Goswami had mentioned that all of these things were spoken by Parikshit to Sukadeva Goswami. So Shaunaka and etc. rishis were interested to know what was this Bhagavatam that was spoken. And to introduce the Bhagavatam, the descriptions of how the Pandavas had left, how Parikshit Maharaj was born, and the activities of Parikshit Maharaj were described. Now, these are the last stages of describing those pastimes. At the beginning of the 18th chapter, Sukadeva Goswami has, Shaunaka Rishi has begged Sukadeva Goswami to speak directly about Krishna's pastimes, to describe Bhagavatam directly. So Sutta Goswami is going to wind up Parikshit Maharaj's pastimes, the last stages of his inquiry. The exact situation that caused Bhagavatam to materialize, that caused Parikshit Maharaj to become detached, for him to renounce the world, to basically go to the bank of the Ganges, for all these great sages to come near him, and then to prepare the scene for Sukadeva Goswami to himself come and present Srimad Bhagavatam. In this narration of how Parikshit Maharaj was cursed, there are actually several important lessons to be learned. The first lesson from an overall perspective is that a devotee is actually not affected by anything of this particular material world. And this is the Bhagavatam's way of showing the standard of devotion of a devotee. You see the same case in the situation of Chitraketu Maharaj. When Chitraketu Maharaj was cursed by Mata Parvati, Lord Shiva addressed her as my dear beautiful wife. His intention was to say, you are beautiful from the outside, And Chitraketu is beautiful from the inside. Your beauty is merely external, and his beauty is internal. The words that you have spoken, that, may you become a demon, may you become a Rakshasa, they have not affected him in the slightest. And because he has not been affected, the curse has neither caused any distress, the curse has neither caused him any kind of turbulence. As a result, he has shown himself to be superior to you and anything that you're able to do to him. And he has defeated you. Therefore, you're just a beautiful woman. That's it. But the same thing is shown in Parikshit Maharaj. Despite the large nature of the curse for apparently a small action on his behalf, he was impervious to fear. He was impervious to distress. And it caused a huge turnaround in his life. And it focused him on his relationship with Krishna as much as it did with Chitraketu. And this point comes out in a specific verse later on in the Bhagavatam. But from an overall perspective, the lesson is that a devotee of that standard of prema bhakti is hardly affected by any turbulence in this world. Now, into the details of this pastime, there are a lot of dynamics that take place in the case of Shringi, the sage's son, Shamika Rishi's son, who had actually pronounced this curse. And his reaction is what is being described in this particular verse. So this verse says, Tataha, at that time. So this describes the events after the curse had been spoken by Shringi. Tataha, abetya, mean entering into ashram, Shamika Muni's ashram. Bala, he was still a young boy. He had been trained in spiritual life, and from past lives and in this life, he had the spiritual potency such that his words would become true by the Lord's grace. But he was yet still a child both in his age and a child in his wisdom and understanding. And it's really an issue when someone of such an underdeveloped or undermature mentality is given such a large amount of power. And Prabhupada has spoken in the previous verse in his purport about how this instance has caused the degradation of the entire Brahmana order. The Balo, when he came in, what did he see? Gale, on the neck of his father, Pitaram, he saw Sarpa, a dead snake, lying on his father's neck. Viksha, seeing this, dukkha arto, dukkha means sadness and artha means cause, because of feeling incredibly sad. And Prabhupada says he was feeling guilty. Mukta kanto, mukta means liberated. He kind of liberated his tongue and just yelled out in great distress. Mukta kanto rurodaha. Shringi actually is an example of somebody similar to what Kunti Maharani describes in her prayers. She says that someone who has Janma, Aishwarya, Shruta, and Shribhir, that is birth, opulence, great learning, and great bodily beauty. If one has any one of these four things, but has not yet learned to depend on Krishna, has not yet developed the sense of being Krishna's servant, such qualities inevitably develop great pride. Janma, Aishwarya, Shruta, Shribhir, Edamana, Madaha, Puman. The word Madaha indicates a maddened state, a heightened understanding of one's own position, heightened understanding of oneself. Edamana, Madapuman, Naiver Hatyapidatum Vai Tvama Kinchana Gocharam. Being satisfied in one's own opulences of birth, wealth, great learning, and bodily beauty. It's very difficult to approach Krishna properly. What this means is that the real sense of what religious principles are cannot be found in such a person. Even if they're knowledgeable of all the scriptures, they miss the essence. They miss the ability to understand what real principles are and how details are to be adjusted in connection with this fundamental principle. And it is very, very subtle at times. Bhishma speaks about this to Draupadi in the Swayamvar, not in Swayamvar, in the hall where Draupadi was insulted. When Draupadi appeals to Bhishma, just see what situation I'm being placed in. Is it right? Is this dharma? And Bhishma says, it's hard for me to judge, because there are many apparently conflicting principles here. But in a particular situation, how different things are to be balanced is actually missed. So Shringi was in that situation. He was maddened by his sense of birth. He was maddened with the understanding that I am a Brahmana. For him, a Brahmana was someone who was the spiritual master of all the worlds. He saw that as a position, not as a service. He saw his father as being a teacher. He saw his father was actually a very great soul. In the previous verse, it is described that he was absorbed in samadhi. He was absorbed in thinking of the Supreme Lord in a very, very deep state of absorption. From such a father who actually understood the principles of religion, the son saw his father as being a great position, and he saw himself as being a custodian of the position of a Brahmana. You see this actually repeatedly throughout the scriptures. In the 9th canto, for example, you have a king who wanted to perform a particular sacrificial ceremony. His priest, Vasishtha, in that context, was engaged in another sacrifice and could not perform the ceremony for this king. This king thought, okay, there's some urgency here, there's some service that I need to do. He engaged another rishi. When Vasishtha came back and found out that the ceremony had been completed, he became very angry. He said, you have disrespected me as your teacher, and you've gone to someone else. This is a breach of etiquette, and I curse you to die. Vasishtha, our acharyas say, was actually being influenced by the desire for money. He wanted the remuneration that came from performing a great sacrificial performance. And because he lost that opportunity, because he didn't perform this particular yajna, he became very angry. That was a loss of judgment. His vision was not focused on the real sense of what his service was. He didn't see his position as being service. There's another instance that comes in again in the 9th canto of a sage who was training. He was a sage he was a guru for all the princes of a king. One of the princes had been placed as a protector for the cows against the tigers. Now, it so happened that a tiger came, and it was completely dark. The prince began to wield his sword, and rather than killing the tiger, ended up killing a cow. The guru, this Brahmana, was very angry. And of course, it is a great sin to kill a cow, but this is slightly different. It was done in complete innocence, with a desire to protect the cow. So rather than prescribing some slight atonement, our acharyas say, he banished the prince completely from kingdom and from all Vedic purification rites. Again, an imbalance of judgment. The Bhagavatam continues to describe how this prince, surrendering to Krishna, left this world. We see the same instance in Shukracharya. Shukracharya was interested in maintaining Bali Maharaj's position. And rather than giving clear-cut advice on the requirement to surrender to Vishnu, he rather advised him to reject Vishnu for the sake of his material possession. And Bali Maharaj rejected him. The rest of the pastime is known. But throughout history, there have been cases where Brahmanas, due to forgetting real religious principles, meaning that their shelter is not Krishna, their shelter has been their position, their shelter has been their wealth, it has caused a maddening of their consciousness. And that maddening of their consciousness has produced a discrepancy in their judgment. It has produced a discrepancy in society. See, when someone is in such an elevated position, a small fault can cause a great discrepancy in society. It is not a problem if some, man on the street makes a small mistake, or even a large mistake. But a small mistake made by a great soul, or someone with great responsibility, causes havoc in society. So Prabhupada in the previous verse has described Even though Shringi calls Parikshit Maharaj Kulangara, meaning the curse of his dynasty, or like the black sheep of his dynasty, Prabhupada actually says that this epithet belonged to Shringi himself, because by his lack of judgment, he had started and created the path of degradation of the Brahmanas. And Shringi's action had created a situation wherein the entire system of society would no longer be protected. And Shamika Rishi speaks of this later on. The problem with Shringi's action is that a king as great as Parikshit Maharaj was even enabling Brahmanas like Shamika Rishi and Shringi to practice spiritual life properly. His rule was enabling Shamika and Shringi to be seen as leaders by people in society. If the same personalities were in existence today, most of society wouldn't be able to see them as leaders. And no matter how elevated these personalities are, they wouldn't go to them. You see in Srila Prabhupada's example, when Srila Prabhupada was personally present, and when his disciples are personally present, how many of members of society know to go to them for guidance, for advice, for shelter, for instruction? And it was a contradiction of religious principles to directly hurt the king so badly. Even if the king was completely corrupt, sages would hesitate to take strong action against the king. This was seen in the example of the 6th canto in King Vena's case. Despite King Vena's atrocities, the sages first went to counsel him. And the reason they went to counsel him rather than remove him immediately is because the removal of a king causes great disruption in society. And the 6th canto describes that when Vena was removed, and the sages just left, they began to hear a lot of noise in the background and like a lot of dust going into the air. And they were wondering, where is this coming from? And it was coming from the people who were rushing away after looting others. And they thought, no, now we have to take action. This is the same reason that Dhritarashtra was not killed in the Mahabharata, because Dhritarashtra was, of course, the emperor of the world. And if he was killed, suddenly all individual kings and all of society would suddenly be split away. And Arjuna speaks about this in the Bhagavad Gita also. He speaks about how when you have a lack of proper rulership, when you lack kings and royal dynasties and dynasties with culture, when everything just kind of fragments away without being completely controlled and unified, then people just kind of diverge away. The Rajasuya sacrifice, or the Ashwamedha sacrifice, the horse sacrifice, or the Rajasuya sacrifice, these sacrifices were held in great esteem in Vedic society. So these sacrifices were sacrifices where the kings would go everywhere in the world and they would conquer or force other kings to surrender to them. And in this way they would create a unified atmosphere to establish Krishna's principles. So Shringi forgot all of this. And all he saw was that here is a dog-like creature. He's a servant of my father. He's been made a custodian of the world because of my father and sages like my father. And he's like a guard around my father's hut. And he decides to come in like a guard dog who's supposed to be outside. He comes in and he eats sanctified food that is not meant for him to eat. How can he ever demand a reception from my father? He's not worthy of such. He's not worthy of such. He's not supposed to perform such actions. Shringi was obviously wrong. He had gotten his judgment completely incorrect. The proper behavior between Brahmanas and Kshatriyas is described in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam in the conversation between Manu and Kardama. So when Manu went in the 22nd chapter to Kardama to propose an alliance between his daughter Devahuti and Kardama, at that time he begins to glorify Kardama for his establishing religious principles, for his austerities, for his seeing the Lord personally. And Kardama Muni responds in turn by saying, it's because of you that this entire kingdom is moving towards Krishna. It's because of you that I'm given a place in society. This mutual sense of respect of each other's services. This mutual sense of working together, of assisting each other in Krishna's service is present in their conversation and in their moods. This mood was completely absent in Shringi. He saw himself as being, I am the custodian of all religious principles. And no matter, how he uses the statements of Shastra, because what he says is not entirely incorrect. Yes, the sages actually do offer custodian of the world to the Kshatriyas. It is said that the world actually belongs to the Brahmanas, and the Brahmanas give the world they give it the world to Kshatriyas for them to be custodians of the Brahmanas' desire in terms of how they want the world to be run. So they practically implement what the Brahmanas want to actually be done, as much as servants implement the master's directions in the world. What he's saying is not false, but his sense of entitlement, his sense of considering that we are the Lord's representatives, that was an imbalance of judgment caused by his lack of Krishna consciousness. So the phrase bhala in this verse indicates not only his immaturity in age, but also immaturity in wisdom. Now, it's very interesting to see how he responds when he goes into his father's ashram. I remember my mother didn't want to buy certain toys for me. I had stolen the money from her purse, and I went to the supermarket, and I purchased some toys. And when I was coming, and I opened it, and then I realized that this was not a very good toy to have after opening it. And then I felt so guilty. And I called my mother from the shopping center. I traveled about 10 kilometers or something to the shopping center myself as an 11-year-old or 12-year-old. And after opening the whatever it was, I called my mother and I said, Mommy, I'm really sorry. I think I took this money and I'm here. She was like, what? And then she cut the phone. And I felt so guilty. I was crying all the way home. And then when I came home, the first thing I wanted to do was give the toy to somebody else so I wouldn't have to see it again. But this sense of guilt, in some sense, is a good thing, because it reflects that one knows what actual religious principles are. If one's heart is really hard, it is very, very difficult to manifest symptoms of remorse, symptoms of guilt, symptoms of regretting one's actions. Symptoms of remorse and regret, even though it is better not to commit the action in the first place, it indicates a certain level of softness of heart. And in that sense, regret and remorse are very positive emotions. It's a step to moving towards correct behavior. This sense of remorse, or the sense of regretting one's actions, is a product of some level of Krishna consciousness, actually. And by large, this is the best compass that kids today can have, that we today can have as we move towards society, a heart softened by Krishna consciousness. Because it used to be that previously people would say, if you have good examples among your parents or in society, then kids could very naturally follow their parents. But the reality is that the level of exposure that people have in today's society is so varied, and it is so full of wrong examples that they can very easily follow someone else or something else. Rather, now people say, if the child is attached to their parents, they will naturally tend to follow what the parents are doing. They will want to be what their parents can be. You can also say if the child is very deeply attached to somebody, like a devotee or any devotee in the congregation, they will very naturally want to be the best they can be to please this devotee. So people say that this attachment is the most important thing. What this means is that it's actually a state of mind. If the mind is attached to a devotee, if the mind is attached to Krishna in some way or the other, that mind becomes the best compass someone has for navigating in this world. All of us have had this experience. We go somewhere, and even if our intelligence is not very strong, and we know what is right, but it doesn't tell us it doesn't help us. I should not do this. Someone whose heart is soft, they feel like, no, this is not right. I shouldn't be here. When kids go to a movie, it feels like, no, I've come to see this movie, but this movie is showing wrong things. I need to leave. Or if they're with friends and the friends start to say things, they'll be like, no, actually, this is not good association. They inherently feel it in their heart. A heart that is filled with Krishna-conscious impressions, therefore, forms the best compass a person can have. And therefore, even if kids make mistakes, they will feel a sense of regret and remorse as much as Shringi did. And that regret and remorse will help them, will give them strength to not make the same mistake again. It is not a problem if people actually make a mistake, as long as they learn to not do it again. Someone used to tell me, if you're going to make a mistake, make a new one. But you're always going to make mistakes. But at least if one's mistakes give us strength and help us understand, I've tried to do different things in this world and it has not been effective. It has not made me happy, and I've sincerely regretted it. It gives one the strength to turn in another direction. The highest level at which one can operate in this world is a strong and trained intelligence, because that helps one even before one performs any kind of activity. But failing that, at least the experience of being in that place with Krishna-conscious impressions fills one with regret, and that's like, once burned, twice shy. One will not perform that same activity again. So this sense of regret, what Shringi is feeling, is in that sense positive. And it's very natural for a child when they perform some great sinful activity. They come before the father and they just, wow, they want consolation. They want to be comforted. No, it's okay. Nothing bad has happened. Everything is fine. Of course, in Shringi's case, it wasn't exactly like that. Some catastrophic events were going to happen from a social perspective. And there was nothing that could be done. And Prabhupada here says, he cried loudly so that he might be relieved, but it was too late. The father regretted the whole incident. But what could be done? In fact, Shamika Rishi was so embarrassed by what his son had done that he couldn't go personally before Parikshit Maharaj. And Parikshit Maharaj also didn't send someone to personally apologize, because he knew how embarrassed Shamik Rishi was, and he didn't want to embarrass him further. There's a lot of softness in Vedic culture, a lot of softness in dealings. But all Shamika Rishi could do was, please, oh Krishna, you are somehow in control of the situation. Please protect the world. Please protect Parikshit. Please protect my son. He's made a big mistake. On a more macro perspective, there are some very interesting dynamics that actually are happening here. So we've examined the particular, emotions and the cause of those emotions that are described in this verse. From a more macro perspective, we see that Shringi was, of course, being controlled by the external energy of the Lord. But the same instance, it was exactly the same instance, Parikshit Maharaj was being controlled by the internal energy. And how the internal energy causes him to act in different ways, to facilitate Krishna's desires in this world, is truly extraordinary. And Krishna's pastimes and the pastimes of his devotees always represent the confluence of the internal energy and the external energy acting subordinate to the internal energy. And this confluence creates extraordinary pastimes. You see this time and time again throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. Whenever any demons are involved, whenever anyone who is acting against, is trying to go against Krishna is involved, you see how the external energy impels them to treat devotees in a particular way, or treat the Lord in such a way that the Lord ultimately manifests in that particular interaction. And that sweetness is only present in Krishna's pastimes. Because unless Krishna and his devotees are personally present anywhere, the internal energy is not present at all. And you just see the external energy, which is acting to either, to teach people basically a lesson, to teach them to go towards Krishna by rewards for good behavior or punishments for bad behavior. But this pastime, you see the external energy acting on Shringi caused him out of his pride to utter a curse. But it was acting subordinate to the internal energy which was guiding Parikshit Maharaj. And his reaction to the same incident was exactly what Krishna wanted, because he was just taking Parikshit Maharaj back to him, and in that instance, revealing Srimad Bhagavatam, so that everyone in the future, our acharyas say, would get a chance to hear and chant about his pastimes, because they weren't there to witness them personally. So this is, an explanation of this verse and the emotions and the background that surrounds it. If there are any questions or comments or any corrections, I would beg the Vaishnavas to please offer something. Oh. Sorry? They say 18,000 verses. Now, one devotee had actually counted the verses there, and he found about 14,000 or so. The reason is that the verses of the Bhagavatam have different meters. So the Bhagavatam, if you put it according to a specific meter, and you break the syllables in that way, it comes to 18,000 verses. So the Bhagavatam in the Shastras itself is described as having 18,000 verses. But it's interesting you say that, because the Bhagavatam actually has been presented in different ways at different times. In the Bhagavatam, there are two lineages. One is the lineage that we described, from the Lord to Brahma to Narada to Vyasa to Sukadeva Goswami to Suta Goswami to Shaunaka Rishi. That's one lineage that's described in the Bhagavatam. The other lineage that is described is Lord Ananta to the four Kumaras, who described it to Maitreya, who described it to Vidura. And that's the content of the third and fourth cantos of the Bhagavatam. So there are two separate lineages described. And in each of these instances, it's not that the exact same verses have been spoken. The principles have always been the same, but the presentation has been different, which is an important point, because some people say, for example, the Bhagavatam was written at a specific time, and they're referring to the 12 cantos of Bhagavatam. What they miss, one important point among the many that they miss, is that the Bhagavatam refers to a set of principles that are enunciated in different presentations, going back historically. And the Srimad Bhagavatam itself delineates its own history, going back a long time in the past. And all of those principles and all of those presentations are still called Srimad Bhagavatam. So in your question, this particular Bhagavatam that was spoken by Suta Goswami to Shaunakadi Rishis, plus the 3 verses that Vyasadeva has added, the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam has 18,000 verses. Hare Krishna.
You mentioned earlier, could you clarify that Lord spoke 4 verses?
Yeah.
So the whole of Bhagavatam was compacted into 4 verses?
Yes. Well, you can say the whole Bhagavatam was compacted into 4 verses. You can say the principles of Bhagavatam were presented in 4 verses. And then these principles were expanded into 3 chapters by Brahma to Narada. Narada spoke the same principles in about 1 or 2 chapters, 2 chapters basically. And Vyasadeva initially just sent a few verses after Sukadeva Goswami. Then he came back, and then it's not clear exactly how much of the Bhagavatam he spoke. Then Sukadeva Goswami spoke the second to certain, canto of Bhagavatam. And for Maitreya, he spoke 2 cantos, 3rd and 4th canto to Vidura. But it was always expanded or contracted as per the need. As per the requirement. See, Vidura was satisfied with 2 cantos. If Parikshit Maharaj, in the 12th canto, Sukadeva Goswami asks Parikshit Maharaj, is there anything you want me to repeat? Is there any other thing you want to know? Parikshit Maharaj said, I know enough, and I want to absorb my mind now on Krishna. If Parikshit Maharaj had asked more questions, if Krishna had given more time for the conversation, you could have another 12 cantos. I think it's said in the plan of the demigods, they have a much more extensive version of Srimad Bhagavatam. I think this is a comment that we sometimes hear. But you can actually, because Bhagavatam represents Krishna's pastimes. And there are 3 levels of pastimes which are spoken. The first is Krishna's pastimes in connection to the material world. And the reason that this is spoken is because we are dealing with the material world immediately. So we need to understand Krishna in the context of what we can relate to. When we understand Krishna's connection with the material world, we understand that actually everything should be focused on Krishna. And that is the purpose of hearing Krishna's pastimes with connection to the material world. And that's the second, third, fourth, and fifth cantos of Bhagavatam. Once we decide that we want a relationship with Krishna, that element of surrender is there, then it becomes important to hear Krishna's pastimes in connection with devotees in this world. Because then we need to understand Krishna's protection, his mercy. Then there are so many instances in the third, fourth, fifth, but then the sixth canto, which principally displays this, and the seventh, eighth, ninth cantos, they describe this. When one's entire goal, when one has developed that sense of strong surrender and faith to Krishna, and one's vision is exclusively focused in going back to Krishna and serving him eternally, then it becomes important to hear his eternal pastimes in the spiritual world, because then one needs to aspire for a specific type of service. So these three levels, Krishna's pastimes in connection with the material world, Krishna's pastimes in connection with the devotees who are in this world, and third, Krishna's pastimes with his eternal associates. They represent three gradations at which the Bhagavatam describes the Lord's pastimes. The entirety of Bhagavatam is a description of the Lord's pastimes. And by hearing Krishna's pastime according to one's level, one advances to the next level of realization until one can hear the 10th canto and focus on the 10th canto of Bhagavatam. Okay? Any last questions?
This Srimad Bhagavatam was written by the documented by Justice. It was mentioning that begins with the yajna performed by the god.
Yes.
Which means it was documented after the incident of that yajna, or before it was documented.
Well, I don't know the exact timeline. Like Valmiki wrote Ramayana before it actually even happened, because they had that vision. So whether it happened exactly before or after, it's not clear, but it includes those incidents. But if one were going like chronologically, it would appear that it was written afterwards. Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande, Radha Gopinath Bhaktavinda ki,